Doris was a timid, quiet girl, the kind of child who entered a room without announcing her presence and left without anyone noticing she had been there at all. She lived with her parents in a large, beautiful house, the type people slowed down to admire from the
This
road.
house is so pretty. Oh,
Her parents, Mr.
yeah.
and Mrs. Timothy, were wealthy business people. They had two children, Gladys and Doris. Gladys was the first child, naturally bright, bold, and always praised. And Doris, let's just say she seemed to live on the opposite side of intelligence. Doris is the second child, soft spoken and quiet. At the end of every school term, Gladys returned home like a small celebrity. Her report cards were always decorated with straight A's and glowing remarks from teachers. Her parents barely needed to read the comment. The grades alone did the praising. Doris' report card, on the other hand, was always terrible. Her results were usually a painful mix of failed subjects and few struggling passes that looked as if they were placed there by mistake. Most times, Doris sat comfortably at the bottom of the class, and on the rare occasion she escaped last position. It was not victory, it was simply second to the last, which felt like escaping rain to meet flood. The difference between the two sisters was impossible to ignore. One child brought pride, the other brought long sighs. Her parents did not give up easily. In fact, they tried everything they could think of. They forced Doris to read her books every day, whether she understood them or not. Morning, reading. Afternoon, reading. Evening, reading. When that did not work, they hired a private lesson teacher, a very strict and serious man who believed intelligence could be beaten into a child through the use of cane. He came with thick books, long sticks, and loud explanations. Read it again, he would say. Doris would read it again. Explain it, he would say. Doris would stare at him like the answer had escaped through the window. No matter how hard they tried, no matter how hard she was flogged, nothing seemed to stay in her head. It was as if every lesson entered her brain politely, waved goodbye, and left immediately. She could read something today and forget it within 30 minutes. Sometimes she forgot it even before 30 minutes had passed. Her parents watched in frustration as their money, effort, and patience slowly disappeared, yet Doris' grade remained exactly the same. They felt that teaching Doris was like pouring water into a basket. No matter how much they poured, nothing ever stayed. With every failed attempt, with every poor report card, their disappointment grew louder and harsher. Their words became sharp, their patience thinner, and soon her mistakes seemed louder than any effort she had made. They always found fault with everything she did, no matter how small or insignificant. If she swept the floor, it was too slow. If she cooked, it was tasteless. If she kept quiet, she was too dull. If she spoke, she was talking nonsense. Why are you always so sluggish? Her mother would complain, folding her arms in frustration. You are too dull for your age, her father would add. Sometimes Doris wondered if there was a right thing she could ever do because she had never seen it. Gladys, on the other hand, could do no wrong. When it came to birthdays and celebrations, the difference was painfully obvious. On Gladys' birthday, the house came alive. She received beautiful dresses, new shoes, books, and sometimes even gadgets. A cake was large. Her friends were invited, and her parents smiled proudly as she opened a gift. Anything for my brilliant daughter, her father would say happily. When it was Doris' turn, the excitement vanished. She often faced excuses and complaints. Focus on your studies first, her mother would say. What is the point of buying gifts when your results are like this? Her father would add. Doris began to feel like she was not living her own life, but standing beside her sister's shadow, watching from a distance. Unfortunately, Doris did not find peace in school either. Some of her classmates had already decided that she was a dull one, and school did nothing to change that idea. In fact, it made it worse. A few teachers would deliberately call her name during lessons to ask her questions, already knowing the outcome. Doris, stand up. a teacher would say suddenly. Doris' heart would start beating fast. She would stand up slowly, staring at the floor, while the whole class watched her like a free show. The question would be asked. Doris would open her mouth. Nothing reasonable would come out. When she failed to answer, the punishment followed. The teacher would flog her in front of the class, using discipline as an excuse. And the students, they laughed. Some laughed so hard you would think they were watching a comedy. Doris would stand there, holding back tears that refused to stay back. On some days, the tears won the battle and rolled down her face freely, while the rest of the class laughed even louder. To them, it was entertainment. To Doris, it was another reason to hate school. All of this slowly damaged Doris' self esteem. After being laughed at so many times, she began to believe the things people said about her. She spoke less, walked more carefully, and avoided attention like it was a dangerous disease. Doris became timid, not because she wanted to be, but because fear had trained her well. She was always scared to mingle with others. In a group, she stayed quiet. In conversations, she stayed at the edge. Even when she wanted to join in, her mind warned her to keep away. What if they laugh? What if they ask questions? What if I say something wrong again? Making friends became almost impossible. Doris avoided people, not because she disliked them, but because she was scared of becoming their next joke. She had seen how easily laughter could turn cruel. Anytime she heard students laughing loudly, her heart would sink. She always assumed she was the reason, even when she wasn't involved at all. It felt safer to be alone than to risk being mocked again. So silence became her shield, and fear became her closest companion. Without realizing it, the world had convinced her that keeping quiet was better than being embarrassed. Gladys, on the other hand, was the complete opposite of Doris. In school, she was outspoken, confident, and very comfortable with attention. Gladys spoke clearly and never hesitated to share her opinions. Her high self esteem was not forced, it was built from years of praise and applause. People liked being around her. Teachers admired and praised her. While Doris stood at the edge of the crowd, Gladys stood at the center of it. One sister learned how to hide, the other learned how to shine. And in that same family, under the same roof, two very different children were being raised in two very different ways. One day at school, during social studies class, disaster struck as usual. Doris faced yet another humiliating moment. Mrs. Shaibu was distributing the test scripts to the students. Some cheered quietly when they did well, others whispered nervously to themselves. Doris, however, already felt a familiar sinking in her stomach. Her heart pounded. She knew what was coming. When it was her turn, Mrs. Shaibu looked at the script, shook her head, and held the test result high enough for everyone to see. Then, in a loud, deliberate voice, she announced, Doris, 0 out of 20. Again? The class fell silent for a moment, then erupted into suppressed laughter. Doris' face burned. Doris, you better come out here, Olodo, Mrs. Shaibu commanded. I will give you 5 strokes of the cane for your unseriousness, she said coldly. And next time, it will be 10. As Doris approached, the students watched quietly. At that moment, she would have preferred the ground to open up and swallow her whole. But of course, the ground had other options. Mrs. Shaibu did not hesitate. One by one, the strokes landed sharply on Doris' palm. Doris clenched her teeth and tried not to cry. The students could not hide their amusement. Yet for Doris, the sting of the cane was nothing compared to the embarrassment, the sense of being the joke in front of everyone, and the disappointed look of her teacher. When the 5 strokes were finished, Doris returned to her desk slowly. Her head bowed, she whispered to herself, almost inaudibly, why is it always me? Why is my brain so stubborn? All through that day, Doris was deeply sad. She could not concentrate on any lesson. Her mind kept replaying what had happened in class, even during break time when other students rushed outside to play and talk. Doris, as usual, remained seated in the classroom, her head resting on her desk, quietly crying. That was when someone stopped beside her desk. Doris looked up slowly and saw Precious, one of her classmates. Precious was a new student who had recently transferred to the school. The moment Doris saw her standing there. Her heart sank. She has come to laugh at me too, Doris thought sadly. Before Doris could say anything, Precious gently placed a hand on Doris' shoulder. Please stop crying, she said softly. Doris froze. Then Precious reached into her pocket, brought out a small candy, and stretched it towards her. Take this, she said with a small smile. Everything will be fine. Doris stared at the candy in shock. No one had ever comforted her like this before. Precious was not mocking her. She was not insulting her. She was trying to help. Doris felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. If you want to be my friend, Precious continued gently, take this candy and eat it. The moment Doris heard the word friend, her eyes widened. A friend? Doris had never really had a friend in school. Other students only laughed at her. The idea that someone actually wanted to be her friend felt unreal. Without a second thought, she collected the candy from Precious' hand and put it into her mouth. Precious watched as Doris eagerly popped the candy into her mouth. A slow, cunning smile spread across her face, the kind that was mischievous. Well, now we are friends, Precious said. Her eyes sparkled with a devilish gleam. From today, no one will touch you again. And if they do, they will be dealt with severely. Doris' heart leapt. She had never felt so happy. Finally, someone would stand by her. Someone would protect her from the teasing, the mocking, the endless jokes. Someone would fight for her when the world laughed. She smiled shyly. Thank you. I am happy we are friends, she whispered. Precious chuckled softly, a sound that was almost playful. Don't worry, she said. I've got your back. But if only Doris had known that candy was not just a candy, and that Precious' mischievous smile meant that her life was about to get a lot more complicated. That night, something strange happened. Doris woke up with a sudden jolt. Her heart raced, and a cold shiver ran down her spine. For a moment, she tried to sit up in her familiar bedroom, but something was terribly wrong. The walls, the bed, the ceiling, none of it looked familiar. Instead, she found herself in a dark, airy space. She blinked, trying to make sense of her surroundings. She was no longer in her bedroom. She was somewhere else, somewhere terrifyingly real and strange. Around her, people stood in a circle. Some were her age, some were younger. A few elderly figures glared at her with sharp eyes. In that moment, a powerful surge came over her. It was as if she were stronger than she had ever been in her entire life. Her eyes widened as she looked around the circle of people. First, she froze at the sight of Precious, her new friend, standing calmly among the strangers. Precious? How is she here? She had never imagined that the girl who gave her the candy, the girl who had comforted her at school, could be part of something so dark. And then her gaze fell on Mama Sikira, the woman who sold puff puff at the junction near Doris' school. Doris had known Mama Sikira as a kind, gentle woman who always smiled. And now she stood in this dark, mysterious place, surrounded by candles and jams. Her eyes were serious and commanding. The sight was almost impossible to believe. She couldn't understand how she had gotten here. One minute, she was in her room, lying on her bed, and the next, she was here. Mama Sikira stepped forward, her eyes meeting Doris. Welcome, my child, she said simply. By eating that candy, you are now part of our protection. If anyone harms you, you can report them to us and leave the rest for us. They will be dealt with. Doris swallowed hard. Her mind raced back to the candy Precious had given her. How could she have forgotten the moments when she thought Precious was the kindest person on earth? She had eaten the candy without thinking, and now she understood why. Precious leaned closer and whispered quietly, you belong here now. No one can hurt you anymore. Doris' eyes moved from Precious to Mama Sikira, to the circle, to the flickering fire. Her life had changed forever. She was no longer the powerless girl she had been. She was now part of something mysterious, something dangerous. She had now been initiated into witchcraft. Life went on normally after that night in the coven. Precious and Doris became inseparable. Their bond was not just friendship, it was reinforced by spiritual forces and powers that no one else could understand. Wherever one went, the other seemed to follow. A few days later, school life threw Doris its usual challenge. It was math class, and once again, Doris had scored terribly in her classwork. Mr. Abdul, their teacher, a strict, no nonsense man with a loud voice, glared at her. There is nothing in that big head of yours, he barked, slamming the book on the desk. Absolutely nothing, except coconut water. The whole class erupted into laughter. Doris buried her face in her hands, feeling the familiar bone of embarrassment. Mr. Abdul gave Doris 3 strokes of cane for failing the classwork. Everyone laughed. Everyone except Precious. She sat quietly in her seat, her eyes narrowing slightly, the corners of her mouth twitching with a mysterious smile. No one expected what happened next. The very next day, shocking news spread like wildfire through the school. Mr. Abdul's hand had swollen overnight. Not just swollen, they had grown ridiculously large, bigger than his entire body. He had been rushed to the hospital, fighting for his life. Staffs and students were stunned. People whispered and speculated endlessly. Did he eat something? Some students wondered. Maybe a curse, others whispered dramatically. But only Precious and Doris knew the truth. They shared a secret glance in class. Mr. Abdul had underestimated Doris and received a severe punishment for his own actions. And now, Doris was very sure that no one could touch her without facing the consequences. At home, life was still the same old nightmare for Doris. Her parents never missed an opportunity to insult her, calling her useless, slow, and good for nothing, while showering Gladys with endless praise and attention. Doris tried to ignore it, but each day the word sank deeper, making her feel small and powerless. Then one day, her father did something that pushed her over the edge. He had invited one of his business associates home. When the man saw Doris, he asked, Doris, my dear, how is school? But her father immediately cut in. You better leave this Olodo girl alone. There is nothing in that big head of hers, always coming home with useless results. But look at Gladys, my daughter, who always makes me proud. The man smiled politely at Gladys and said nothing, but Doris felt her chest tighten, her face burned with shame and embarrassment. That night, Doris could no longer take it. She took the matter to her circle, explaining everything, her parents' constant insults, and the humiliation she endured. They listened. Mama Sikira nodded. Special smiled knowingly, and the elders whispered among themselves. Finally, they decided her parents must be punished. The very next day, her father's company had burned to ashes. The fire had consumed everything, leaving nothing behind. It was complete destruction, and it happened so suddenly that no one could explain it. The blow was devastating. The family's life changed suddenly. The luxurious life they once enjoyed began to vanish as their source of income was suddenly cut off. And all the while, Doris watched. She did not cry. She did not panic. Instead, she wore a small mischievous smile, the kind that only comes when someone knows they are quietly responsible for justice being served. Her parents had spent years belittling her, treating her like nothing, and now they were paying for every insult, every humiliation. Doris knew something they didn't, that she had the power now and that she could finally watch her tormentors stumble, all without lifting a finger herself. Few weeks later, Doris' father came home after a long, stressful day. Already in a bad mood, he had just received more bad news about his failing business and was snapping at everyone. That evening, Doris accidentally broke a plate while serving food, and the contents spilled all over the tiled floor. Her father completely lost his temper. Look at this girl, he shouted. After everything I am going through, this is what I get? You are dull, completely dull. Nothing works in your head at all. I'm wasting my money on your school fees, but there is nothing tangible to show for it. He went on to call her useless and a burden, and as usual, he compared her to Gladys, yet again, praising one child while tearing the other down. Doris said nothing. She quietly cleaned up the broken plate, That night, she felt hot and bitter. She didn't want to do anything to harm her father, knowing the family was already struggling. But then she remembered all the cruel words he had thrown at her, and how his insults and favoritism had caused more pain than good. And after careful thought, she decided to take the matter to the coven again. The witches listened carefully and agreed that he needed a serious punishment, not death, not destruction of property this time, but a punishment that would ensure he would never abuse Doris again. The next morning, chaos broke loose. Doris' father woke up to discover that his mouth had grown unusually large. It was swollen, heavy, and painful. He could barely speak, could not eat properly, and moving his mouth felt like lifting a heavy load. He was rushed to the hospital. Doctors examined him, ran tests, and even referred him to other hospitals. But no one could find anything wrong. His mouth looked abnormal, yet medically unexplainable. Money disappeared quickly. The little savings they had left were spent on drugs, scans, and hospital visits. His wife became withdrawn and constantly worried, moving around like a shadow of herself, but nothing changed. All the while, Doris watched quietly. No tears, no pity. Deep inside, she felt a strange satisfaction. To her, this was not cruelty, it was payment. Payment for years of insults, neglect, and emotional abuse. And as her parents struggled, Doris kept her secret carefully hidden. The family sank deeper into misery. No amount of money spent was able to bring their father back to his normal life. More properties were sold, and in the middle of all this chaos, only Doris was calm. No one had time to insult her anymore. No one had the strength. Everyone was too busy drowning in their own problems. One afternoon, Doris' mother sat quietly with a close friend, her eyes swollen from too many nights of crying, as she explained everything that had been happening in her family. Her friend listened in silence. After a long pause, the woman spoke gently. She advised Doris' mother to take the matter to church. She mentioned a pastor she knew, Pastor Olatunji, a man known for praying deeply and handling unusual cases. Doris' mother brushed the idea aside immediately. She and her husband were not devoted Christians. Church had never been important to them. But days passed and nothing improved. Her husband remained in the hospital, unable to speak properly, and the doctor still could not explain what was wrong. Hospital bills kept piling up. Finally, she gave in. Early one morning, her husband was taken to Pastor Olatunji's church. The atmosphere there was calm but intense. Pastor Olatunji listened carefully as Doris' mother explained everything. Without hesitation, he asked them to begin prayers. The prayers went on for hours. They prayed, they sang, they prayed again, calling on God for mercy and intervention. Doris and Gladys sat quietly at the back, watching everything unfold. To Doris, it all looked like drama. She observed silently, mocking the prayers in her heart, confident that nothing would happen. Then suddenly, the pastor stopped praying. He turned and walked straight towards Doris. Pointing at her, he said calmly, "Young girl, the Spirit of God is ministering to me. You must confess." The atmosphere changed instantly. Mrs. Timothy, Doris' mother, stared at Doris in horror. Doris tried to speak, but her body trembled. She felt a spiritual force overpower her, and suddenly, words poured out of her mouth beyond her control. Everything she had hidden, everything she had done, her involvement with the coven, the witches, and the punishments, she confessed everything. Pastor Olatunji prayed and poured anointing oil on her head. Doris screamed and fell to the ground. The secret Doris had kept so carefully was gone. The power she had relied on was finished, and nothing would ever be the same again. The prayers at the church did not end with shouting or celebration. Instead, there was a heavy silence, the kind that made everyone uneasy but hopeful at the same time. That night, Mr. Timothy, Doris' father, slept deeply for the first time in weeks. By the following morning, something strange but gentle had happened. The heaviness in his mouth had reduced. He tried to speak, slowly at first, expecting pain, but the words came out clearly. Mrs. Timothy burst into tears. when she heard his voice properly for the first time in a long while. Even Mr. Abdul, the strict mathematics teacher, recovered in the hospital. The strange swelling on his hands disappeared, leaving doctors confused. Everything felt unusual. After the prayers, the pastor asked Doris to stay behind in the church for complete deliverance from the spirit of darkness. Pastor Olatunji continued to pray with her privately, guiding her patiently until she was fully delivered and set free from the spirit of witchcraft. When it was clear that she was stable, Pastor Olatunji called her parents. He spoke calmly, without condemnation. He taught them about forgiveness and unconditional love. He reminded them that God forgives freely and does not keep records of wrongs. He urged them to forgive Doris wholeheartedly. He spoke about how love should never be selective, especially within a home, how parents should not provoke their children. His message was simple but heavy. A child starved of love will look for it elsewhere, even in dangerous places. Mr. and Mrs. Timothy wept openly. That same day, they forgave Doris sincerely and promised to change. From then on, the family began attending church regularly. Miracle was no longer just something they heard about, it had become personal. They believed in God's power because they had witnessed it. As this event unfolded, Doris noticed something unsettling. Precious stopped coming to school. Her desk remained empty, untouched. There was no transfer letter, no explanation. No one knew what had happened. Doris did not know whether to feel relieved or sad. She would not lie. She missed her friend. But deep down, she knew things would be better if they stayed apart. Around the same time, Mastikira's puff puff stand disappeared from the junction. No goodbye, no replacement. People assumed she had relocated, but no one could say where. The silence surrounding both of them felt deliberate. Doris understood it better than anyone that some doors, once closed, never reopened. At home, things were different. Her parents took a loan from the bank to start their business again, and with God's favor, things began to improve. For the first time, Doris was no longer treated like a mistake that happened by accident. Her parents spoke to her gently. They asked about her day. They listened. They corrected her without insult. Instead of punishment, they chose affection. Her mother surprised her one evening with a gift, a new pair of shiny heels, a colorful bag to match, something Doris had always admired from afar but never owned. She promised that if Doris worked hard and improved academically, she would receive a new mobile phone in the next season. Even when her results were still not impressive, her parents encouraged her. They told her she could do better, and this time, Doris believed them. She began to read, not because she was shouted at, not because she feared punishment, but because she wanted to understand. She asked questions, she practiced, she tried again when she failed, and sometimes even prayed for God's guidance. By the end of the term, Doris had moved from the bottom of the class to the middle. It was not perfect, it was still behind Gladys, but it was progress. Her parents celebrated her efforts, they praised her improvements, and made her feel seen. And for the first time in a long while, Doris felt something she had never truly felt before in her life. She felt loved.